Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We're so excited to have you here and to talk about free speech on campus events. As you just heard, I'm Niala Boodhoo. I host our Axios podcast called One Big Thing. Our latest episode is out this morning. Please feel free to get it wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're following along on social media, please use the hashtag Axios Events. This morning, we are going to be discussing free speech on college campuses, the state of play, what's working, what's not working, and what policy leaders and experts think needs to be done to move forward. And just to note, these conversations are not going to be specifically about one conflict, issue, or moment in history. We're going to be talking about free speech as a whole on college campuses. Full disclosure, just as a journalistic note, in my volunteer life, I am actually on the board of trustees for my alma mater, Calvin University. Calvin University, nor any of its board members had any input or influence over this event, and Axios oversees all of our events and maintains the highest editorial integrity for everything that we do. One other programming note, the House Committee on Education and Workforce Chairwoman, Virginia Fox, was scheduled to join us, but ended up not being able to make it this morning. However, we look forward to hopefully having her at a future Axios event and gain her perspective. With that said, all of those housekeeping aside, let's start our conversations this morning. Our first guest joining me on stage is a partner at Wilkie, Fair & Gallagher. He's also a lecturer at the School of Law at the University of Virginia and the former chief investigative counsel for the U.S. Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Please join me in welcoming Timothy Heaphy. Hi, Tim. Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So you led investigations after Charlottesville in August 2017, and as I just noted, for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Can we start with lessons? Are there commonalities that you found in the after-action reports that are important for us to begin with as we set the stage here today?
Yes, absolutely. So I was fortunate enough to both do an independent review of the Charlottesville Unite the Right events in 2017 and then the attack on the Capitol.
Move your mic up a little.
And there are a lot of commonalities between the two events. Law enforcement failures, failure to appreciate intelligence, suggesting violence, a passive approach, and not operationalizing the threat of violence. And the use of social media and organizing those events, how it brings people together, how a lot of Americans get their information. And then ultimately, both events were sort of started with a core impetus and organizing principle. It was Civil War statues in Charlottesville, allegations of election fraud at the Capitol, but they kind of metastasized into much broader forums for anger and grievance at institutions.
What specifically did you take away from UVA when we talk about the balance of free speech and public safety?
Well, I was general counsel at UVA after the events of Unite the Right, and it's fundamentally sometimes difficult for universities or governments to fulfill their core constitutional obligation to protect free speech, but also to keep people safe. Public forums like university campuses have to accommodate all kinds of offensive speech, and offensive speech generates strong emotion and often leads to conflict. And for schools or local governments, like in the city of Charlottesville, the tension between those two obligations can be really difficult to maintain.
How important do you think independent reviews are when situations like this happen?
Tremendously important. After an event like this, regardless of whether it goes well or not well, it's crucial to sort of pause, mine lessons learned. In Charlottesville, after Unite the Right, there was a lot of anger in the community. And the city, just by launching an independent review, giving me and our team access to information, and then letting us tell the story without any alteration or hiding of any of those facts. That was the first step toward restoring confidence, right? Effective organizations are self-critical, and independent reviews after the fact help derive those lessons and restore public confidence.
And how is that different than the work that you did when it comes to January 6th in the Capitol?
Well, it's similar. I do think that after January 6th, there was a similar desire, public desire, for understanding how those events came together, and telling of a credible narrative as to what happened, what the forces were that led to the attack on the Capitol, is the first step toward healing and preventing future conflicts. I'd like to think that the work of the Select Committee educated the people, but also made a future attack on the Capitol less likely because of the lessons learned that we identified.
And so just because of how important that is, can you just underscore some of those lessons for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, going back to the commonalities between Charlottesville and the Capitol, we writ large, institutions, continually misassess danger. We overestimate danger, in my view, when it comes from people of color, and we underestimate danger when it comes from middle-aged white guys. That's something we got to focus on and fix. We also need to understand how Americans now get their information. It's through curated social media feeds, no longer an objective, read the front page and whatever's there, but echo chambers that pump to Americans things that are based upon their prior engagement. And that allows misinformation to proliferate, and it allows people to live in these echo chambers. Those are real issues with which we have to struggle if we're going to not only prevent horrific events of political violence from happening, but just get better at living in a diverse, democratic society.
And how do you see those lessons different or amplified on college campuses versus as we're talking about the country as a whole?
Yeah, very, very much applicable on college campuses. Again, just like the government in Charlottesville, college administrators now have volatile situations where they have to protect the free speech of protesters, even if that speech is offensive. As long as it doesn't directly incite violence or threaten an identifiable person or group, then it's protected. Yet the words that we're hearing on college campuses are creating very strong feelings of a lack of safety, particularly by Jewish students. So how do colleges reconcile that tension? There's a legal tension. The First Amendment conflicts sometimes with Title VI. Title VI requires colleges to ensure that the learning environment is not hostile to any shared national origin group. So simultaneously protecting speech, but also creating an environment in which everyone feels safe is really, really difficult. And colleges need to navigate that in real time.
So you told me something interesting backstage, that you teach a course at UVA. It's called Riots and Law, which is a fascinating course title name. Everything you just described to me there about free speech, I think, was a pretty good summation of the First Amendment in terms of your understanding of it. Do you think that on college campuses there is that understanding of what the First Amendment is?
No. I encountered in my investigation going back to Charlottesville and in my classes at UVA now, a fundamental misunderstanding about the breadth of First Amendment protection. The First Amendment protects hate speech. It protects racist speech. Again, unless the speech incites imminent lawless action, it cannot be restricted in a public forum, like a public university. And there are a lot of my students that just don't really get that. They think, well, we should shut down the Unite the Right rally. Why did we let them come? Well, we can't. Government has to make decisions that are content neutral. Government doesn't decide which speech is okay and which speech is not okay. If we go down that path, then lots of things that one person thinks is valid, anti-police protests, for example, in the wake of George Floyd, could by some government be deemed as intimidating and shut down. So content-neutral regulation is enshrined in American law for years, and a lot of the generation of students with which I interact, not all of them fully understand the value of that.
I have a lot of family in the UK. I actually started my career as a journalist in the UK, and I think, there's a fundamental different understanding of what hate speech is in the UK versus here. What you're describing generationally, do you feel like younger generations are maybe moving to a shift, regardless of what the Constitution says, of saying hate speech should not happen?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize. I don't know that this generation doesn't think hate speech should be protected. I do think there's something going on generationally. I think the students that I teach at UVA have grown up in a culture of a lot of parental involvement, a lot of trigger warnings and safe spaces. They have an expectation of the university almost as an extension of their parents. When I was in college, I wanted the university to stay out of my way and out of my business and not tell me what to think or what to do. This generation of students, many, I can't paint with a totally broad brush, looks to the university for protection, looks for the university to make public statements. And that's a really different and interesting generational change that I think we're dealing with.
You wrote something in the Chronicle for Higher Education that good leaders are willing to evaluate their own decisions in an effort to inform future institutional response. So my question is, given the myriad of stakeholders and cultural battles at play here, how hard is it for leaders to make these decisions that we are talking about here?
Yeah, it's risky because you are laying bare a lot of sausage making that's really hard. Going down the road of a review is going to uncover a lot of the raw material that may not be flattering. It may put leaders or the organization in a bad light. But it's healthy in any relationship or any organizational culture to be willing to look at yourself critically. And my advice to universities, or my advice based on Charlottesville on January 6th, is that while there are short-term costs in terms of that information coming out, there's a long-term gain. You benefit from it. There are also a lot of issues with what is privileged and what is not. Are you setting up some potential claims against the organization? It really depends on the situation. The review that I did in Charlottesville was attorney-client privileged, but the privilege was waived and we disclosed in full everything that we found. So there are legal issues that have to be navigated, but overall, really healthy for an organization to be willing to look under the hood and assess what went right and what went wrong.
So we've been talking about generations. I just want to end by asking, we spent a lot of time talking about students. Do you feel that college administrators and universities have a clear sense of what we've been talking about and are equipped to handle this?
No and no. My clients at UVA were some of the smartest people in the world whose values I endorsed 100%. They had no clue how to manage a mass demonstration. They're not equipped. In lots of organizations, we promote people because they're good at something into a management position where they suddenly have to deal with things with which they're not familiar. So college administrators, by and large, again, you can't paint with a completely broad brush, have no clue, generally. They understand the First Amendment maybe, but then navigating really fraught issues of public safety, where to draw the line between protection of community safety versus free speech, those are really hard decisions that they're trying their best, but they're not always equipped, based on their experience, to implement.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it at that, but thank you very much for being with us this morning, Tim Heaphy.
My pleasure. Thank you.